Alright, let's look at 6E and finish up Standard 6. Describe the reasons for and the importance of the Monroe Doctrine. That's two different things. The reasons for the Monroe Doctrine and then the importance of the Monroe Doctrine. So our main focus is going to be on the Monroe Doctrine. And the language of the standards, the element is Monroe Doctrine. The theme is U.S. foreign policy. Describe the reasons for and the importance of the Monroe Doctrine. We're going to focus right now on reasons for the Monroe Doctrine. In our explanation, we have to return back to Napoleonic Wars. If you remember, Napoleon was trying to take over Europe. And while he was, Thomas Jefferson used diplomacy to get him to sell Louisiana Territory to him. But during these Napoleonic Wars, France is going to sell out Louisiana Territory, all of its holdings in North America. So France is out of the picture. It's out of the New World. And then Spain is going to become weaker and weaker and weaker because of these Napoleonic Wars. And because it becomes so weak, several things are going to happen where it loses a lot of its land over in the Western Hemisphere. One reason was, we talked about Andrew Jackson coming down to Bainbridge and Decatur County around Pensacola and St. Mark's and New Orleans. He's going to use that to try to weaken, and then those two British people, he's going to shoot one and hang the other. He almost causes another international event, but since he was a hero of New Orleans, he gets away with it. Right after that, John Quincy Adams, the son of John Adams, goes to Spain and makes the Adams-Onis Treaty, and in it, Spain gives up Florida to the United States. So the United States gets Florida from Spain, so it loses that. And then a boundary set in the New World at the Louisiana Territory, southern part of the Louisiana Territory. So Spain cedes this Florida, both east and west Florida, and then sets the southern boundary for the Louisiana Territory here on this red line, the 42nd parallel here, and all down in here. Okay, so that's the Adams-Onis Treaty. So Spain loses Florida and loses some of the territory that it thought it had before, and gets a little bit from the Americas where they claimed, but loses Spanish Florida. Okay. Now, during the Napoleonic Wars, a second thing happens that causes Spain to become very weak and lose a lot of its holdings here in the New World. A lot of Spanish colonies in South America and in Middle America, and even in Mexico, are going to declare their independence. So Chile, Peru, Colombia, Mexico, and a bunch of other Spanish colonies are going to have a successful rebellion, and they're going to gain their independence in the 1820s. So if we look at this map here, we see that Mexico was in 1821, Cinco de Mayo, Mexican independence, the 5th of May, 1821. And if we look at Peru, 1824, if we look at Chile, 1818, here's a few of these, 1819, 1821 in Santo Domingo, Haiti in 1804. A lot of these Spanish colonies are going to declare their independence, become independent republics. So Spain loses out on all of its holdings in the New World. This is during the Napoleonic Wars. It becomes so weak. Alright. In the Adams-Onis Treaty we discussed earlier, there were 3 agreements here between the United States and Spain. Spain cedes Florida to the United States, and the U.S. abandons claims to northern Mexico, Texas, and then the southern border of Louisiana Territory was defined, and we saw that in this. And then right after that, Spain loses all its holdings because all Mexico and all these other used to be Spanish colonies rebel, have a revolution in Mexico, Central America, and the South America, and they become independent nations. Now, after the Napoleonic Wars, Napoleon's going to be put down, and he goes to the island of Elba. He's eventually poisoned and dies there. Napoleonic Wars are going to end, and when they do, Spain is humiliated by all the loss of its colonies, rebelling, holding revolution, becoming independent. So Spain turns to France and asks France to help them get all their old colonies back. In other words, go back and get those old colonies and then subject them to Spanish colonization again. So fearing this was going to happen, President James Madison makes a speech to Congress on December 2nd, 1823, and he's going to present to Congress the American position in Latin America, meaning in these countries, how we felt about these countries down here, Spain taking them back over. James Monroe, President of the United States, is going to issue this speech, and it's made to encourage Spain and France to discourage Spain and France from reconquering Spanish colonies. And President Monroe's speech becomes known as the Monroe Doctrine, and it's not really called the Monroe Doctrine until 1852. It was first called the Monroe Doctrine in 1852, but it's this speech he makes on December 2nd, 1823, that outlines several things, mainly to Spain and to France at the time, but it also was meant for Great Britain and all other European nations. And here's what it outlined: 4 things. The first one: Republican governments in the American continents are different. They're republics, they're not monarchies, and they're separate from those in Europe. So that's the first thing he says in his speech. Secondly, he said the American continents, both North and South America, in the Western Hemisphere, were no longer open to European colonization. Europeans need to stay out of the Western Hemisphere. 3, the U.S. will regard European interference in the Western Hemisphere in the political affairs of independent New World nations as hostile behavior. And number 4, the U.S. will not interfere in the internal affairs of European nations over in Europe, in the Eastern Hemisphere. So that's what the Monroe Doctrine outlined. In 1823, the Monroe Doctrine basically was a doctrine that proclaimed that European powers could no longer colonize or interfere in the affairs of nations of the Americas. That's both North and South America. And here's 2 excerpts from his Monroe Doctrine speech. His speech to become known as the Monroe Doctrine. Alright, the American continents, by the free and independent condition which they have assumed and maintained, are henceforth not to be considered as subjects for future colonization by any European power. And any attempt to interfere in the Western Hemisphere will be regarded as a manifestation of an unfriendly disposition toward the United States. Okay, so the United States is going to be threatened by any European nation trying to interfere in the Western Hemisphere. And a bunch of pictures you can find, cartoons and all, showing no foreign interference. And this shows the Atlantic Ocean. Here's the Western Hemisphere. That's the Eastern Hemisphere, Europe. This guy represents Great Britain. And he would interfere with his money he sent over to invest in Latin American colonies. Alright. So Uncle Sam here represents the Monroe Doctrine, and there's his hat that has Monroe Doctrine in it. Basically, this one says the United States is laying claim to all of the Western Hemisphere against European interest. Want Europe to stay out of the Western Hemisphere. There's South America, there's North America. So the United States is warning Europe, it's Great Britain, France, Germany, any of those nations in Europe, to stay out of the Western Hemisphere. And here's a different picture. The Monroe Doctrine draws a line in the dirt. This is the Western Hemisphere. This is our turf. Stay out of here. Okay. And there's a picture on the globe of the Western Hemisphere. Includes North America, Canada, Central America, and South America. This is the Western Hemisphere. And here's a different picture. United States. Monroe Doctrine, hands off. Here's Europe and Africa. This is the Eastern Hemisphere, and then that's the Western Hemisphere over there. Okay. Here's a different one. no trespassers. Western Hemisphere over here, Europe and the Eastern Hemisphere over here. Here's a different one here. The Monroe Doctrine shows Uncle Sam protecting South America, North America, Middle America from European powers. Okay. And here's a different one here. A wall built where the Western Hemisphere is separated from Europe. And in 1923, a commemorative coin was made, and on the back it shows the Western Hemisphere, South America, and North America there. Okay, and you can see it closer on the back. Notice the olive branch representing peace there. Okay, so the next part says describe the reasons, describe the importance of the Monroe Doctrine. What's this second part? The importance of the Monroe Doctrine. The Monroe Doctrine that the speech he gives, that becomes known as the Monroe Doctrine, becomes the cornerstone of American foreign policy in the Western Hemisphere in the future, from that moment on. And by 1900, his statement will be used to lay a foundation for U.S. intervention in South America. And in 1900 or 1898, President Theodore Roosevelt is going to use the strong Navy and the Monroe Doctrine to add to what he called what become known as the Roosevelt Corollary, to actually go into Latin American areas and intervene there. And because of that, and what you're probably asking is, what does this have to do with territorial growth? You know, because what we're supposed to do here is we're supposed to be talking about Standard 6, and in Standard 6, our main standard was basically, you know, how does territorial expansion and population growth, how did it impact this new country that we were in, and what does this have to do with territorial expansion? That's probably a question you're asking. Let's see if we can find that. There it is. Okay. So the student will analyze the impact of territorial expansion and population growth and its impact on the early decades of the new nation. So, you know, the question is here, what does the Monroe Doctrine, you know, what does it have to do with that territorial expansion? And in 1898, 1900, we're going to see the United States get control of, you know, several areas. Hawaii in the Pacific Ocean, you know, and down in Latin America, you know, Puerto Rico is going to become a protectorate of territory of the United States. So that's territorial expansion as well. So we can add here this student will analyze the impact of territorial expansion by 1900. It's the Monroe Doctrine that puts this into place, using his doctrine at around 1900 to intervention in Latin America and in the Pacific, where we get more territory. At the time that the Monroe Doctrine was made, really the United States was too weak to really enforce any of this or to protect those colonies in South America that used to be Spanish colonies. Small U.S. Navy could not defend Chile, Peru, Mexico, or any other South American or Middle American nation against European powers. There's just no way. We had the strength to do that. We had a small Navy. Also, the Monroe Doctrine did not carry the force of law. You know, we made it unilaterally, which means the United States only made it. We didn't really communicate with other Latin American countries, those republics like Mexico, Peru, or Chile, and they didn't actually support it openly, you know, the Monroe Doctrine. So it did not have the force of law. Alright, I hope that, you know, we've met our standard, and I think we have, the reasons for and the importance of the Monroe Doctrine. Look back over this. If you have any questions, ask me in class. Good luck on the test. Reason was, we talked about Andrew Jackson coming down to Bainbridge in Decatur County around Pensacola and St. Mark's and New Orleans. He's going to use that to try to weaken, and then those two British people, he's going to shoot one and hang the other. He almost causes another international. And then Spain is going to become weaker and weaker and weaker because of these Napoleonic Wars. And because it becomes so weak, several things are going to happen where it loses a lot of its land over in the Western Hemisphere. The element is Monroe Doctrine. The theme is U.S. foreign policy. Describe the reasons for and the importance of the Monroe Doctrine. We're going to focus right now on reasons for the Monroe Doctrine. In our explanation, we have to return back to Napoleonic Wars. If you remember, Napoleon was trying to take. All right, let's look at 6E and finish up Standard 6. Describe the reasons for and the importance of the Monroe Doctrine. That's two different things. The reasons for the Monroe Doctrine and then the importance of the Monroe Doctrine. So our main focus is going to be on the Monroe Doctrine and the language of the standards over Europe. And while he was, Thomas Jefferson used diplomacy to get him to sell Louisiana Territory to him. But during these Napoleonic Wars, France is going to sell out Louisiana Territory, all of its holdings in North America. So France is out of the picture. It's out of the New World.